Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us on this third webinar in the series that we're running throughout the year. This particular webinar, as you can see by the title there, is about protecting Microsoft Office 365. My name is Jonathan Mepstead. I'm the Sales Director for the UK and Ireland at Netskope, and today I'll be joined by my colleague Ross Asquith, who you also can see on the screen in front of you, who will introduce himself separately shortly. Just to give this some context, you're going to see a series of slides over the next 30 minutes, and Ross and I will try and make this fairly interactive in that we'll pose some questions around why the market is moving to Office 365 as ambitiously and aggressively as it is, and obviously that's going to be driven by advantages, and the flip side of that coin, as there always are two sides, will be the disadvantages or the potential risks to people's data as they move to the cloud. So what I'd like to do first is just give you some context, as I say, around Office 365 and why we're seeing a revolution in the workspace. It's fascinating that both the analysts and also the markets are embracing Office 365 in the way that they are. And you can look here at the last revenue figures that we had available to discuss, and we can see that the cloud portion of Microsoft's revenues are significant and they're growing. Here we can see the last quarter, the cloud portion of their revenues accounting for up to $6 billion, which is up by nearly 60% year on year. Massive growth. We're soon to see the next quarter's results coming out, and the market is expecting that $6 billion to be somewhere closer to $9 billion, which will still be a very significant growth on year. So, you know, clearly people are enjoying what Microsoft have to offer and to sell to them, and Ross and I have been finding this as well for the last few years that we've been working at Netskope, that most of the projects that we get involved in are driven at the core by enterprises move to Office 365 and the concerns therein that they have around potential additional security concerns that transformation that brings to bear. So the next slide, thank you, is some interesting validation that we've had recently in Netskope around why potentially we should be considered by organizations that are moving to Office 365, and it's from none less than the current chairman of Microsoft, John Thompson, who is also formerly the CEO of Symantec. And it was a wide-ranging interview that he had fairly recently. You can see the date there, 12th of July, with Yahoo, and they talked on a number of different issues, ranging from, as I say, the impact of the trade war between China and the US, and then on to AI and big technical challenges and developments in the marketplace. And towards the end, the interviewer asked John Thompson regarding his views on interesting approaches to cloud security, fundamentally. And Mr. Thompson spoke about a number of different companies, not naming any, that he felt were doing things differently, more holistically, not just focusing on firewalling or IPS. And when pushed to actually name one of these companies, he was fairly reticent, but then came forward by saying, yes, actually, one in particular is called Netskope. It's the one that I think everyone ought to take a look at, and the company is doing exceptionally well. So brilliant validation for Netskope. But again, it sort of talks about this partnership that we have with Microsoft and have had for the last few years, where we are the only gold partner as a CASB for Microsoft. And I'm sure most of the people on the call here will recognize the fact that Microsoft do have a CASB Lite offering baked into their E5 package. But time and again, we see that being a gold partner with Microsoft allows us to stay close to the development of the package, the platform, and to adapt our technology accordingly so that we can stay in tandem step with Microsoft as the platform matures, and to make sure that we bring you the best and most current security concerns. So I guess when you look at Office 365, some of the, could you build the slide out, please, Ross? Thanks. Thank you. So again, just further validating the parts of the platform that people adopt first are consistently found in our Netskope's quarterly cloud report as being the most popular apps that are being used by large organizations. Time and again, when we do an assessment of the top 10 apps, we see that Microsoft has a dominant position, be that Office, Outlook.com, as you'll expect, where people move their exchange from on-premises out into the cloud. But then also from the collaboration platforms, we see a lot of OneDrive and SharePoint being used. And obviously the other messaging stroke collaboration platforms such as Skype coming into play as well. This hasn't changed. We don't expect it to change. There's obviously some challenge from Google in this enterprise space, but still by far we see that Office is the most widely adopted business-focused enterprise and collaboration platform on the marketplace. And this is validated by a lot of the joint customers that we have, we being Netskope and Office, in providing wraparound security to their transformation to Office in the cloud. And we're going to focus on just two here. The first one really is a very large retail customer, possibly one of the largest Office deployments globally. And here we're doing the standard data protection really, so particularly looking at PCI and PII data in Office 365. And then another customer, very large global brand as well. And this is another very common use case where they are looking to leverage the agility that the cloud affords and making sure that corporate data is safe and that's not ending up on unmanaged devices, but still allowing people on mobile or unmanaged devices from accessing the parts of Office 365 that they need to. And we'll go more into these use cases as we go through the presentation. But hopefully that gives you a flavor of the type of large organization that we're familiar with in helping them move successfully to Office 365. So let's start now by just going through some of these benefits that make it so easy for people to migrate to Office 365. And there are about 6 of these benefits that we're going to highlight today. And the first one, I think, is the most obvious, and that's really just the commercial model that Office 365 affords to large enterprises. And I like to think of this as being something that's fairly elastic, and obviously large organizations are changing quite frequently through acquisitions and diversifications and so forth. And historically, it's been quite difficult for organizations to keep an accurate count of the number of enterprise license users they have for any particular assets that they would use. Office 365 obviously allows you that elasticity, as I mentioned, to grow and retract as you need to. So it means that you have a much easier way to keep control of your costs and bring people on board as you roll this out across your global estate. So all in all, far better from an agility standpoint.
Yeah, it's Ross here. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for the introduction earlier. As you quite rightly said, I think there are great benefits to Office 365, and this is one of the reasons that people adopt it, this ease of use, ease of adoption. And you've highlighted commercially how easy it is to get started with Office 365. It's also technically quite straightforward. You know, I simply perhaps open up some permissive rules within my web filter, within my firewall, to allow my users out to Office 365. I add in some domains, a bit like the ones you see here, and my data starts flowing, and that's great. But I'm here to talk opposite you, Jonathan, on the risks that this then invokes. You know, although it's easy for the business to adopt Office 365, it's also quite easy for users, individuals, or business units within an organization to adopt Office 365. And you know, an individual could sign up for Office 365 Home Edition just as easily, throw down their credit card and subscribe to that service. And because the business has opened up access to Office 365, those same rules allow me to upload potentially company data into an unsanctioned instance or an unsanctioned account of Office 365. And so we have this data exfiltration risk that's been opened up by the business through its eagerness to adopt Office 365. So yes, it's a benefit, I agree with you, but there is a downside to it. But I think you're going to go on and talk about some other benefits, and I'll chip in with some thoughts of my own as we go along.
I don't doubt you will, but yes, you're right. So the old shadow IT sort of curse, I guess, there is true too. All right. Well, it's another benefit I think here is one that's quite pertinent, and that's the habit people like myself of using their desktop or their laptop as the local store for corporate information. It's obviously quite useful for me, but not much good for anyone else. So the cloud offers the opportunity to remove that from your local desktop or laptop and put it into a central, easy to audit, manage and control repository such as OneDrive or SharePoint, and then to open that up for further sharing and collaboration. So that has to be better, right? Then I guess enterprises potentially are moving towards that dumb terminal type vision in the future where everything should be in the cloud.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, if you consider the old days of putting files on servers within the organization, you can absolutely see, instead we're storing those files centrally in an environment that we don't have to kind of manage quite so closely and worry about the resources it has and so on. So moving data into Office 365 is obviously one of the primary objectives when you adopt the service, but we do need to keep an eye on exactly what data is going into the Office environment. So if we consider a part of Office like OneDrive, where we're storing these unstructured files in that environment, what if one of those files we uploaded contained PII data? Or what if another of those files contained PCI data? These are the sorts of data categories that are often highly regulated. I may be subject to PCI or GDPR. That means that I can't actually put these things, or I shouldn't be putting these things into a cloud environment. Maybe the data protection agreement I have with Microsoft and the service I'm taking from them, again, means that this data shouldn't be there. So yes, it's great to store data in the cloud, but we do need to be very aware of what types of data users are uploading, and we may need to put some controls around that in order to safeguard ourselves.
Okay, yeah, good point, actually. It's very easy, isn't it, to put it up there, and yes, I think it's all good and well, but so another area that I guess leverages what we just talked about is that, and this one I see a lot, and it's often one of the first use cases that we attempt to provide some assistance with. It's allowing people on any device access that data that is in OneDrive or SharePoint, or access their emails in Outlook.com, and that affords tremendous agility for the workforce, right? So it's that ability to go onto, your aunt's laptop if you're visiting them over a holiday season, or your partner's laptop, and just quickly log on, see what you need to see to keep current with where you are on work. Everyone does it, I'm sure, on holiday, just for fear of that deluge of emails when you get back on a Monday morning. It's quite good just to use whatever you have available to you to keep up to speed with what's going on.
I can only agree with that. It is extremely useful to be able to check your email in that way. And email is a great example because we're all used to being able to check our email from anywhere on our personal devices, or as you say, on somebody else's machine perhaps when we need to. So it's great. An email comes in, I can log in, I can see the email, but I think the risk appears when I can go into that email and I can perhaps download some content from that email, most likely an attachment perhaps. So in this example here, we see, there's some sort of financial document that's been emailed to me, and I have this ability to download the attachment to the device. Now, if that file ends up on that device, and it's not a company device, it's an unmanaged device, then in effect, I've lost control of it. I don't know where it's going to go from there. I don't know who's going to use that device next, where that device may end up. I don't know if that device is encrypted or protected with some credentials. I don't know if from that device it's going to be uploaded to some other service or emailed somewhere else. So it's quite important maybe that we think about how the data is going to be accessed and used and where it's going to end up if we're going to allow our users to access cloud data from these kinds of unmanaged devices.
Yeah, true. And there's been obviously fairly highly publicized episodes of people losing laptops as well, whether they're corporate or not. Yeah. Okay, good point. Got me there. All right. So perhaps moving sort of associated with email, but slightly different, would be the ability that the cloud gives you to use the sharing of that capability, copy a link and share that link. That's something that we're all familiar with limits of email in terms of the size, so this is a great way to get certain documents that are fairly large across to people on a wider audience, potentially, certainly people that are internal to your organization. So it allows for avoiding that pitfall of emails being dead the minute you send them. So this is a way of keeping everything current. Certainly very useful to sending out links to external users for the organization as well. So again, for me, this is something that's relatively new to the way of working that I've experienced, but certainly something that I have embraced.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's not only Office that we see this kind of sharing being used. Yeah. We see it in services like Dropbox and Box and so on. We're all familiar with creating these shared links, and we've probably all received them as well. And it is a convenient way to receive, especially a large file, because if you've got 50 meg files, you don't want to be attaching them to emails. Instead, you send a link and someone can download it. It's great. But I think the problem here is whether users give enough consideration to what that link actually means when they create it. If they have the permissions to create a link that is available to anyone, like as you see on screen here, when the user puts that in an email and sends it to someone, do they really realize that that link could be forwarded on to somebody else, or that link could be discovered on the internet? And suddenly what they were trying to share with a colleague or an external third party that they trust is actually shared with pretty much anyone on the internet, including perhaps someone with quite nefarious kind of intentions. And so I think creating links is great for collaboration, but it's also dangerous in terms of controlling the scope of those links and where they can end up. And again, ultimately, this is going to result in our data ending up on machines and in places that we don't want it and we can't control it. And that's the kind of common theme, I guess, emerging from the last couple of use cases. So, so yes, so carry on.
Okay, well, something that we did in sort of preparing for this presentation today was something that's, again, an interesting aspect of cloud working, and that's where you can actually create content in the cloud on the fly. So it's like a mouthful, but it does facilitate a very nice way to collaborate with someone, particularly over a project-based working. I think this is something that's, again, it's interesting you bring up other services, but I know this is something you can do outside of Office as well, but it does work very well within the O365 environment, that ability to create content in the cloud in real time and collaborate with other people as you're doing that.
Yeah, agreed. Collaboration when you're working online is great because things happen in real time. You can see the other person making changes. You can work in an excellent way, in that collaborative way. You can also work from perhaps machines and terminals that don't need the kind of traditional software installed on them. So I could work here on this PowerPoint presentation from a machine that didn't have Office physically installed on it. Again, I could work potentially on this corporate piece of work from any device. But again, this online authoring of documents does cause a problem. What if here on my desktop I have some privileged information, some information that I have access to that's perfectly fine to be stored on my local device and within my company's perimeter, but I don't want it stored in the cloud. Again, it's sensitive information, and we see here some PCI data, some credit card information. And if I were to open up Word Online, I have a way, by copying and pasting, of transferring data from inside the organization into the cloud that doesn't actually involve me uploading the file in the traditional sense. And it might be that controls that I've used in the past to detect a file being uploaded to the internet wouldn't detect me copying and pasting from one place to the other. It's conceptually slightly different, and it's technically slightly different as well. And so this creating content in the cloud, whether I copy it or in fact whether I type it out by hand into this online document, copying it from one side of my screen to the other, does pose some problems again in managing data that we don't want escaping into the cloud.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So the last one that I'm going to put out there as an obvious benefit is one that sort of ties a lot of this all together, and it automates the the backup, if you will, or the removal of local-based content up to the cloud using their sync client. So this is brilliant, as I mentioned, from a backup point of view, but also brilliant from an ongoing collaboration assistant. So it's something that it's just easy to set up, something that just is a great peace of mind. But again, it's excellent just to know that there is this ability to move data up somewhere else where it should be, where people can just access as well.
Yeah, agreed. And you know, the OneDrive desktop app or sync client, people call it different things, is great for backing up. I use it for that purpose, and it's good again for this collaboration. I can create a set of files that I maintain and I'm responsible for, and I can keep them up to date and know that they're going to be syncing through my shared folders with all my colleagues who need to access that data, and they will always have a local up-to-date copy of that information as well. Undoubtedly a benefit. But where it can go wrong is if I'm the one or any of my team are the one with some sort of malicious file, and we don't need to think about how that malicious file got there, but we all know that things do end up in the wrong places. And if somehow, let's say worst case, this is some sort of ransomware infection, maybe a piece of malware, ransomware like Verloc, which actually encrypts your files and turns those files into active variants of itself, then we could end up with a document that's actually an active malicious payload that syncs into the Office 365 cloud and then synchronizes across my organization, rendering a great many machines instantly, encrypted by ransomware. We're basically helping the ransomware spread through this fan out of malware, just because we're using these automatic synchronization clients. And so we don't want to obviously be faced with this kind of a screen across our organization. That's our worst case scenario. And so we've looked at these few use cases, and thank you, Jonathan, for putting in the kind of positive spin, and they are all great reasons for adopting Office 365. And I've kind of been the voice of doom and said that there are problems with these features. So to summarize them, that they've all been about the data that's stored within Office 365, and we've looked at how data could move. Maybe a user could move it into an unsanctioned account or instance within Office 365. We've seen data moving potentially to unmanaged devices where we lose control of it because it's being downloaded to those devices. We've seen data perhaps being shared too widely, and that meaning that it again falls into the wrong hands, ends up in the wrong places. And we've seen the wrong type of data being stored in Office 365 in the first place, confidential or regulated data. And we've also seen then this destruction of data and the propagation of malware as well. All of these things, if we were to summarize them, are to do with data protection. They're all data protection issues. And it's our responsibility to look after the data that we put into Office 365. And it's in our interest to do exactly that. So Office 365 is a shared responsibility model. That's the kind of name that's given to an architecture where that your service provider, Microsoft, take ownership of some of the underlying pieces of the platform that we're using. So you see highlighted here things like the network and the operating systems that are behind Office 365. Yes, that's for Microsoft to secure, but there's also the services that we're using, the data that we put into that environment that we need to look after. So this is your responsibility to govern how your users are using the service, what actions they're taking, for example, what data they're putting in there and how they're sharing it, and looking out for threats that might be finding their way into that environment. So luckily, if you want help with these things, then controlling risky activities that the user takes, like sharing, or looking at what data might be uploaded into Office 365, or hunting for threats within your Office 365 environment, these are all things that Netskope can help with. And this is, Netskope as a CASB integrated with Office 365 can help you manage your section of the shared responsibility model. So in the next sort of 10 minutes, I'm going to run through a quick demonstration, and we're going to go through the same use cases that we've just discussed. And in each time, we're going to talk about, and you're going to see how Netskope can help protect against these data protection issues. So here's my desktop. You'll notice before I do anything that we actually have the Netskope client installed on this machine. So this is like a managed machine, my corporate machine. And what the Netskope client is doing, you see its little icon up in the top status bar, it's steering my traffic that when I access cloud applications through Netskope. So if I open up the Office environment, then my traffic is going to be steered through Netskope, and that means that Netskope can apply policies. So if I go to Office and I try and sign in, the first use case we're going to look at was the one where the user signs in with some non-corporate credentials, perhaps their personal account or their own account within Office 365. So this sign-on I'm doing here is not my corporate credentials, it's not my corporate account. And if I try and log in with those credentials, Netskope is able to see the identity that I'm logging in with, compare it with what is known to be my corporate credentials, and then block the user. Give them a friendly message to say why you can't sign in, and then obviously force them to retry. And this time I'm using my auto domain, which is my company's corporate domain, and you'll see that this time my sign in is successful, which is great because now we're in the Office environment. We can continue to go and look at our next use case. So the second use case that we talked about was actually just monitoring the types of data that were uploaded into Office. So OneDrive is the place for putting unstructured information, uploading files and so on. And so that's what we're gonna do now in the demo. Here's my OneDrive environment. I have some files in there already, but on my desktop to the right-hand side, I have some other files. And we're going to look at, firstly, how simple it is to upload files into the environment. Microsoft make it nice and simple for us. I can drag and drop these files. So I'm going to pick up this notes document. I'm going to drag it across in front of my browser, and OneDrive will give me the option to drop it into a particular folder. And if I let go of it, it's going to upload, and we get a little status bar saying uploading, and then OneDrive will confirm that it has been uploaded. So that was just a fairly ordinary file, nothing restricted in there, but I'm now going to move my customer confidential document and try and do the same thing. So when I try and move that document, Netskope brings up a message to me telling me that, as an end user, I can't upload that because there's some security problem. Now, if we look at the properties of that file, I'll briefly show you why it got blocked. We're using a data leakage prevention engine to detect some content in that file. So we'll do a quick look and you'll see, very basic, we're looking for the word confidential, we're looking for the phrase internal use only, and they both feature in that document, and that's why I couldn't upload it. So let's switch now away from my corporate machine and actually look at perhaps my personal device. So here, in this scenario, we can imagine I'm at home on my personal Windows machine. Netskope is nowhere to be seen here in terms of any management of the endpoint, but I have access to Office again. I can sign into my company's Office environment using whatever credentials I've been given. It's all legitimate. And I'm pushed into the Office environment, and my user experience is exactly the same. I'm going to see the same desktop that I'm used to seeing, portal within Office, and on the face of it, I can do exactly the same things that I could do when I was on my managed device. But the use case we specifically called out was the one about email. So from here, my home PC, I'm going to open up Outlook.com within the Office 365 environment, and I'm going to check my email. Now, if you remember, what we were worried about here was being able to download content from within the email service, download attachments to the device. So if I read my mail, that's fine. I can go through and look and read emails. But if I find a file with an attachment like this one, I let that load up, and then I say I want to download the attachment that's on this message. We'll see that here Netskope is actually going to apply an activity level policy. So I'm not actually caring what the content of that file is. The action of downloading is prohibited when I'm not on a corporate device. That's the basic policy. And here you see a message within the browser telling the user that they can't download it because you're not on a company device. So if you're eagle-eyed, you'll see in the URLs here that Netskope is involved in the transactions with Office 365 by kind of inserting itself. You'll see that the domain that we're visiting isn't office.com. It's actually a domain at Netskope, the GoScope domain. So that's our personal use device and how we can block those downloads. So we're switching now back onto our corporate device. So here I am back in on my corporate machine. I've got corporate files stored locally, and I've got data within my OneDrive environment. And now we're going to look at that the sharing of data. So I'm going to choose a file within OneDrive, select it, and I'm going to try and create a share. So I click on the share button. That's one way I can do this. And then I'm going to say I'm not going to send an email to anyone with a link, but I'm going to create a link nonetheless and click on that copy link button. And once again, Netskope can detect the action that I am taking. So it says you are not allowed to create a share. So it obfuscates the link and it prevents me creating the share link. And I could click on the copy link button directly and exactly the same thing would happen. So I could obviously apply this granularly because I may have a case for some users being able to do that. But what's most important is that when I need to, I can prohibit that action. So let's look at our fifth use case, which was all about the creation of data within the cloud. And I'm going to use exactly the same example as I used in the presentation deck just a minute ago. I'm going to use Word Online to create some new content within Office 365. So there's nothing being worked on my desktop here. I'm not using Word locally. I'm using Word Online. And I'm going to input some data, some text into this file. And you'll see, looking at the top bar, the top title bar next to the document name, that this is being saved as I work on it back to OneDrive. And when I put in that text, after a short while, Word Online will save it. There we go, it says saved. Now, if I have some data locally that I want to copy into this Word Online environment, I can select some credit card numbers, for example, copy them, and then paste them into Word. Now, when I do that, we've suddenly created content that shouldn't be stored in the cloud. And so when the Word Online tries to save to OneDrive, that's the point where Netskope sees that transaction happening and again throws up this message to the end user telling them that they can't take that action. And Word Online is going to keep retrying because it's just going to try and keep saving this document, so we keep seeing the pop-up window again and again. And what I need to do is shut down the document window so that Word stops retrying. It will time out eventually, and then my message goes away. But I'm going to go back into OneDrive. Let's take a look at the file that we just tried to create. Now, as we saw earlier, up until the point I put the credit card numbers in, it was fine and it was happily saving. So when we look at this file, the content of it is, at the point before I put the credit card numbers in. So I see the text that I typed in. Okay. So now we're going to move away from working online in the browser, and we're going to look at that OneDrive sync tool. So up in my toolbar, you'll see I'm running the OneDrive sync client, and if I click on it, I can open up my local folder that's syncing with the OneDrive cloud. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to infect my machine with malware and ransomware, but I'm going to do a simpler test than that. I'm just going to drag a file that I know is a malicious file into my local folder on my machine, and then the sync client is going to try and sync that back up to OneDrive. And because it's malware, we're going to see it being transacted, we're going to scan it en route, and again we're going to present the user with that notification that there's something they're trying to do that they shouldn't be. And in this case, we're obviously doing a good job of protecting the business from that malicious payload. So there you have a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of what Netskope can do, the ways that it can help address the data protection issues and risks that we walked through earlier. And I hope that was of interest. And to summarize, coming back to our shared responsibility model, hopefully you could see those blue boxes on the right-hand side, that Netskope's taking care of can really help you address those areas of the shared responsibility model that are your responsibility. So in summary, just to run through what we've seen, it's important to recognize that we haven't made up these use cases, these data protection issues. These are the most common use cases that customers are coming to us with. They're the most common problems that we're being asked to solve. So many of our customers start by addressing these simple use cases. You can consider them a blueprint for an initial policy when you're looking to protect your data when you're using it within Office 365. And the shared responsibility model means that you can't rely on Microsoft really to address those issues. Microsoft may have plenty of security controls built into its platform, primarily to protect the platform itself, but less so around protecting your data and what you want done with it. And I guess the final note here is that Netskope is helping you to enable Office 365. If you're facing challenges rolling out, widely deploying Office 365 because of gaps in its security controls, because of an inability to provide the sort of security that you're used to providing on-premise and at your perimeter, you're struggling to do that in the cloud, then, well, that's what a CASB is for, and that's what Netskope is for. So protecting your data and protecting you against threats that are cloud-based is what Netskope are all about. So this was the final slide. I hope you found that session useful. Many thanks to Jonathan. And if you have any questions, please ask in the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to wind up the presentation right here.
Thank you very much, boss. Bye-bye.